Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever stood in a room full of people, a room that should have felt like home, and realized you were a ghost? This is a story about a mother who was made to feel like a stranger at her own son's celebration. It is a story about the quiet, unassuming love that builds foundations, and the loud, hollow pride that threatens to tear them down. Martha clutched the gift to her chest, the simple brown paper crinkling softly under the pressure of her fingers. It was tied with a piece of twine she had saved, a small, humble package against the backdrop of a world that felt anything but. The house loomed before her, a monument of glass and steel, its windows like cold, indifferent eyes staring out into the manicured perfection of the lawn. Each blade of grass seemed to stand at attention, a silent soldier in an army of wealth she could never hope to command. This was her son's house. Her Leo. The boy she had raised in a cramped two-bedroom apartment that was always filled with the smell of baking bread and the sound of her humming. The boy whose scraped knees she had bandaged and whose nightmares she had chased away with whispered stories and warm milk. He lived here now, in this palace of quiet judgment. Today was her grandson Tommy's 5th birthday, and a familiar ache of hope and anxiety pulsed in her heart. She wanted so badly to belong, to bridge the chasm that had quietly grown between her world and his. She had spent a week putting his gift together, not a store-bought toy that would be forgotten in a day, but a piece of her soul, a piece of their history. She pulled her worn cardigan tighter around her shoulders, a flimsy shield against the cool breeze and the even cooler reception she feared awaited her inside. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she walked up the stone path, each step feeling heavier than the last, an uninvited pilgrim approaching a shrine where she was no longer sure she was welcome to worship. The front door was a vast slab of dark wood, and it swung open before she could even knock. A wave of noise and perfume washed over her. The inside of the house was just as intimidating as the outside, a cavernous space filled with people whose clothes cost more than her monthly rent. They held delicate glasses of champagne, their laughter echoing in the high-ceilinged room, a language of effortless privilege she didn't speak. She saw her son, Leo, across the room, trapped in a conversation with a man in a sharp suit. He looked handsome, but tired, a faint line of stress etched between his brows. He hadn't seen her yet. Martha scanned the crowd for a small, 5-year-old face, her grandson, Tommy. And then she saw her. Amelia. Her daughter-in-law moved through the party like a shark gliding through water, her smile sharp and predatory, her eyes missing nothing. When those eyes landed on Martha, they narrowed almost imperceptibly. A mask of polite welcome slipped into place, but it didn't reach her eyes. Amelia detached herself from a group of women and began to move towards Martha, her heels clicking a sharp, disapproving rhythm on the polished marble floor. "Martha," Amelia said, her voice a smooth, cold stone. "You made it." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a welcome. It was an accusation. Martha offered a fragile smile. "Of course, dear. I wouldn't miss my Tommy's birthday for the world." She held out the simple gift. "This is for him." Amelia's gaze flickered down to the brown paper and twine, a ghost of a sneer touching her lips before she quickly suppressed it. "How rustic," she murmured, not taking it. "Listen, Martha, we need to talk. Come with me." She placed a hand on Martha's arm, her grip surprisingly firm, and began steering her away from the main room, away from the laughter and the light, towards a quiet, sterile hallway that led to the back of the house. The warmth of the party faded behind them, replaced by a chilling silence. Martha's heart began to beat a frantic, panicked tattoo against her ribs. She knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in her stomach, that this was not going to be a pleasant conversation. The hallway felt like a long, narrow tunnel, and at the end of it was a utility room door, slightly ajar. Amelia guided Martha past it, towards the heavy back door that led to the garden. She stopped just short of it, turning to face Martha with an expression of strained patience, as if dealing with a particularly slow child. "I'll be direct, Martha, because I don't have time for games. Look at this party. These are important people. My father's business partners, Leo's new boss. This is about our future, about Tommy's future. Martha looked back towards the sound of the party, confused. But it's a child's birthday party, Amelia. A sharp, humorless laugh escaped Amelia's lips. Oh, Martha. You're so naive. It's never just a party. Everything is an opportunity. Everything is about perception. And you don't fit the perception we are trying to create. The words were like tiny, sharp daggers, each one finding its mark. Martha felt the blood drain from her face. I don't understand. I'm his grandmother, Amelia sighed, a sound of profound exasperation. Yes. And we appreciate the sentiment. But your presence here, in that sweater, it's an embarrassment. Leo has moved on from the world you raised him in. He's better than that now. We are better than that. She finally looked at the gift in Martha's hands, her lip curling in open disgust. And what is that? You can't possibly give him that in front of everyone. They'll think we're charity. Tears pricked at the corners of Martha's eyes, hot and shameful. She could say nothing. Her throat had closed up. Amelia saw the tears and her face hardened even more. Tears won't help. This is for the best. This, she said, gesturing back towards the party, is for family. Her voice dropped, taking on a tone of finality, of cruel dismissal. And you are not a part of this family. Not anymore. Then, she did it. She raised her hand, her perfectly manicured finger pointing not at a chair, not to another room, but straight towards the back door. Towards the exit. I think it's time for you to go. Please do it quietly. I don't want a scene. The click of the back door shutting behind her was the loudest sound Martha had ever heard. It was the sound of a final, slamming door on her heart. She found herself standing in the perfectly landscaped garden, the scent of roses and freshly cut grass thick in the air. It felt like she couldn't breathe. She stumbled away from the house, away from the muffled sounds of the party, and found a cold, wrought iron bench at the far end of the garden, hidden from view by a large, weeping willow. She sank onto it, the humble gift still clutched in her hands. The tears she had held back now streamed freely down her wrinkled cheeks, silent, heartbroken tears for the little boy she had raised and the man she no longer knew. The narrator's voice fills the silence, gentle and somber. She was more than just an old woman in a worn cardigan. She was a fortress. After her husband, David, had passed away when Leo was only 10, Martha had become both mother and father, working 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. She was a cleaner at the local hospital in the mornings and a cook in a school cafeteria in the afternoons. Her hands were rarely still, always scrubbing, mopping, or stirring. Yet those same hands, chapped and calloused as they were, had been the softest things in Leo's world. They had baked him a special chocolate cake from a recipe her own mother had taught her, every single year for his birthday. They had sewn patches onto the knees of his only pair of good jeans. They had held him tight when the world felt too big and scary. She had poured every ounce of her life, her energy, her meager savings, into him. She made sure he had books, even if it meant she ate soup for a week. She pushed him to study, to dream bigger than their small apartment, to climb out of the life of struggle she had known. She had wanted him to have a life like this, a beautiful house, a successful career. She had never imagined that in gaining it, he would lose his memory of how he got there. The gift in her lap was the proof. It wasn't a cheap toy. It was a photo album she had painstakingly assembled. The first page had a picture of a young Martha and David, beaming, holding a newborn Leo. Page after page held the story Amelia was so desperate to erase, Leo with a chocolate-smeared face on his 5th birthday, blowing out candles on a lopsided, homemade cake, Leo holding his father's old fishing rod, looking proud, a teenage Leo at his high school graduation, his arm around his beaming, tearful mother. It was a testament to a life built not on money, but on an abundance of love. It was her hidden gift, not just baking or cleaning, but the sacred act of remembering. And her own son's wife had just thrown it, and her, away like trash. Inside, the party reached its crescendo. "Time for the cake," Amelia announced, her voice bright and commanding, the unpleasantness with Martha already forgotten, locked away. She clapped her hands, and two caterers emerged from the kitchen, carrying a confection that looked more like an architectural model than a dessert. It was a 5-tiered masterpiece, a fantasy castle of fondant and spun sugar, with delicate flags and towers that seemed to defy gravity. It was ostentatious, ridiculously expensive, and the absolute centerpiece of Amelia's perfectly curated event. The guests murmured in admiration, pulling out their phones to capture the moment. Little Tommy's eyes went wide, a genuine, childish delight finally breaking through the stuffy atmosphere. Amelia beamed, her chest swelling with pride. This was perfection. This was the image she wanted to project. The caterers carefully placed the cake on a central table. Amelia leaned in with a silver lighter to ignite the 5 sparkling candles. But as she did, one of the caterers, trying to adjust the cake's position, stumbled slightly. It was a small misstep, but it was enough. A collective gasp filled the room as the magnificent cake, the symbol of Amelia's social triumph, listed precariously to one side. A collective gasp filled the room. The top 2 tiers, with the most intricate sugar work, slid sideways, cracking and then crumbling in a slow-motion avalanche of pastel-colored ruin. It collapsed onto the pristine white tablecloth in a heap of frosting and broken dreams. A deafening silence fell over the party. All that was left was a sad, broken stump of a cake. And then, the worst sound of all. A small, heartbreaking wail from the birthday boy. "My cake!" Tommy cried, his face crumpling as big, fat tears rolled down his cheeks. "It's broken." The spell was shattered. The perfect party was now just a room full of awkward adults and a sobbing 5-year-old. Amelia's face, a moment ago triumphant, was now a mask of pure horror and fury. Her perfect day, her perfect image, lay in ruins on the table. The sight of his son's genuine distress, and his wife's superficial panic, was like a splash of cold water on Leo. For months, he had been sleepwalking through his own life, caught in the undertow of Amelia's ambition. He had allowed her to dictate their friends, their lifestyle, even his relationship with his own mother, all in the name of keeping the peace and building a future. He had told himself that Martha's simple ways were just that, simple, and that it was easier to let Amelia manage things. He had let the phone calls to his mom become shorter, the visits less frequent. He had convinced himself it was because he was busy, but the truth, a truth that now hit him with the force of a physical blow, was that he had become ashamed. Ashamed of his own roots. Ashamed of the woman who had given him everything. Seeing Tommy cry, not for a lost business deal or a social gaffe, but for a broken birthday cake, a simple childhood joy, reminded him of his own birthdays. He didn't remember tiered castles of fondant. He remembered the smell of chocolate. He remembered his mother, her face dusted with flour, humming a cheerful tune as she pulled a simple, single-layer cake from their old, rattling oven. He remembered the taste of love. And with that memory came a sudden, jarring question. Where was she? He scanned the room, a cold dread creeping into his heart. She wasn't there. He turned to Amelia, who was hissing at the mortified caterers. "Leo, can you believe this incompetence? This party is ruined. Absolutely ruined." Leo grabbed her arm, his voice low and urgent. "Amelia. Where is my mother?" Amelia flinched, pulling her arm away. "She had to leave early," she said dismissively, her eyes not meeting his. "She wasn't feeling well." It was a lie. He saw it in the flicker of her gaze, in the tightening of her jaw. He knew his mother. If she wasn't feeling well, she would have found him first. She would never just leave. The whole ugly picture began to form in his mind: his mother's arrival, Amelia's tight smile, the walk down the hallway. He felt a profound sickness rise in his gut, a self-loathing so intense it almost buckled his knees. He had let this happen. While he was networking and playing the part of the successful son, his mother had been thrown out of his home. Without another word to his wife, Leo turned and walked out of the room. He ignored the confused stares of the guests, the awkward silence that followed him. He walked through the cold hallway his mother had been led down, his own home suddenly feeling like a foreign and hostile place. He pushed open the back door and stepped into the garden. The evening air was cool, and for a moment, he saw nothing. Then, his eyes were drawn to the weeping willow at the far end of the lawn, its branches creating a curtain of sorrow. And there, sitting on the bench beneath it, was a small, slumped figure. It was his mother. He walked towards her, each step an act of penance. As he drew closer, he could see the faint glint of tears on her cheeks in the fading light. She wasn't sobbing loudly, just sitting in a state of quiet, profound grief. In her lap, she cradled the humble, brown paper gift. She looked up as he approached, her eyes red-rimmed, and she quickly tried to wipe her face, a lifetime of not wanting to be a burden etched into the gesture. "Leo," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "What's wrong? Is Tommy okay?" Even now, after being so cruelly dismissed, her first thought was for her grandson. The question shattered what was left of his composure. "No, Mom," he said, his own voice thick with emotion as he sat down beside her. "Nothing is okay." He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in years, and saw not an embarrassing old woman, but the tired, loving warrior who had fought for him his entire life. "Amelia told me you weren't feeling well." Martha offered a sad, watery smile and shook her head slightly. She just thought it would be for the best if I left. It's a fancy party, Leo. I understand, but he did not understand. He would never understand. His gaze fell to the gift in her lap. "What's this?" he asked gently. Without a word, she handed it to him. His fingers fumbled with the twine. He slid the photo album from its wrapping. He opened it to the first page. There they were, his father, young and vibrant, and his mother, her face alight with a joy he hadn't seen in years, holding him as a baby. He turned the pages, and his whole life, his real life, flooded back to him. There he was, with a gap-toothed grin, covered in mud. There he was, on his mother's shoulders, reaching for an apple. There was the lopsided chocolate cake. It was a story of a love so deep and unconditional it humbled him to his very core. He looked from the photos of a life rich with meaning to the cold, ostentatious house behind him, a symbol of a life rich with things. And he finally saw the truth. A powerful resolve solidified within him, clearing the fog of shame and cowardice. He closed the album and placed it carefully on the bench beside him. He looked at his mother, at her kind, worried face, and saw the true heart of his family. He had been looking for it in the wrong place all along. He took her chapped, worn hands in his own. They felt like home. "No, Mom," he said, his voice now clear and strong. "She was wrong. This," he said, tapping his own chest, right over his heart, "this is where the party is. It's where you've always been. And it's not a party without you." Martha looked at him, confusion and a glimmer of hope in her tired eyes. He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. "Come on. We are going back inside." A memory sparked in his mind, a lifeline to authenticity in this sea of artifice. "Mom," he asked, a new urgency in his tone. "Do you still have it? Your little book?" Martha's brow furrowed for a second, and then she understood. A small, genuine smile, the first he had seen all day, touched her lips. She reached into her old, worn handbag and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, its pages softened and stained from decades of use. It was her recipe book, a handwritten legacy of flavors and love passed down from her mother, and her mother before that. It was her secret weapon, her hidden talent, the physical manifestation of her nurturing soul. He took the book from her as if it were a sacred text. "Let's go bake a cake," he said. And holding his mother's hand tightly, he turned and led her back towards the house, walking out of the shadows and back into the light, ready to reclaim his family. He was no longer just Amelia's husband or a successful professional. He was Martha's son. And he was finally going home. The silence in the grand living room was thick and uncomfortable when Leo and Martha walked back in. Every eye turned to them. Leo's hand was holding his mother's, not in a gesture of frail support, but in a statement of unified strength. Amelia, who had been trying to regain control, froze, her face a mixture of shock and fury. "Leo, what are you doing?" "I told you," Leo cut her off, not by raising his voice, but by speaking with a calm, unshakable authority that silenced the entire room. "You told me she left," he said, his eyes locking onto his wife's. "You didn't tell me you threw my mother out of my son's birthday party." A collective, quiet gasp went through the room. Amelia paled, her mask of composure finally cracking. "You said this was for family, Amelia," Leo continued, his voice resonating with the weight of his rediscovered conviction. "My mother is my family. She is the foundation of it. Without her, there is no me. There is no Tommy. There is no this." He gestured around the opulent room, and for the first time, it looked not impressive, but hollow and sad. He then turned his attention from his wife to his son. Tommy was still sitting on the floor, his face tear-stained. "Hey, buddy," Leo said softly, crouching down. "Grandma's here. And we have a problem. There's no cake. But Grandma has a secret weapon." He showed Tommy the little leather-bound book. Tommy's eyes, full of curiosity, looked from the book to his grandmother's kind face. "We are going to make you the best birthday cake in the world. The one she used to make for me. Do you want to help?" Tommy nodded eagerly, a real smile finally returning to his face. Leo stood up and, ignoring Amelia completely, led his mother and his son towards the magnificent, state-of-the-art kitchen. Some of the guests, moved by the raw, unfolding drama, began to quietly see themselves out. Others, intrigued, stayed, watching from a respectful distance as the real heart of the home, the kitchen, came to life. Martha stepped into the gleaming, professional-grade kitchen, a space as foreign to her as a spaceship. But the moment she opened her little recipe book, the stainless steel and marble faded away. She was back in her element. She tied on an apron, her movements suddenly efficient and sure. Leo stood beside her, not as the master of the house, but as her humble assistant. "Okay, Captain," he said with a grin. "What do you need?" She gave him a list: flour, sugar, eggs, cocoa powder, butter. Simple ingredients, found even in this palace of gourmet exoticism. Little Tommy, perched on a stool, was given the important job of stirring the dry ingredients in a large bowl. The tension that had suffocated the house began to dissipate, replaced by something warm and real. The metallic clicks of measuring spoons, the soft whisking of eggs, the gentle murmur of Martha giving instructions. She showed Tommy how to crack an egg, her wrinkled hands guiding his small ones. She let him lick the spatula, and his giggle was the most beautiful sound that had filled the house all day. Leo watched his mother, her face relaxed and focused, a quiet competence radiating from her. He saw the virtuoso she was, not just of baking, but of creating love out of thin air. This kitchen, which Amelia used primarily as a showpiece, was finally being used for its true purpose: to nourish, to comfort, to bring people together. The scent of melting chocolate and butter began to waft from the oven, a rich, honest aroma that was more inviting than any expensive perfume. It smelled like forgiveness. It smelled like childhood. It smelled like home. Amelia stood in the doorway, a silent, stunned observer, watching this simple, powerful act of love completely undo the artificial world she had worked so hard to construct. She watched her son laugh with a woman she had deemed worthless. She watched her husband look at his mother with a love and admiration she now realized he had never shown her. The rustic cake in the oven was more than just a dessert, it was a judgment. And she had been found wanting. The timer buzzed, and Martha, using a dish towel as an oven mitt, pulled out a perfect, dark, single-layer chocolate cake. It wasn't a 5-tiered castle. It had no fondant towers or spun sugar sculptures. It was humble. It was honest. It was beautiful. While it cooled, she whipped up a simple fudge frosting, its glossy sheen promising pure, unadulterated delight. When it was ready, she let Tommy help her spread it over the cake, his little fingers getting wonderfully messy. They didn't have fancy candles, so Leo found a single, plain white one in a drawer. They stuck it in the center of the cake and lit it. The small, flickering flame cast a warm glow on their 3 faces. They sang happy birthday to Tommy, their voices filling the quiet house. It wasn't a performance for guests, it was a prayer of gratitude for each other. Tommy blew out the candle with a single, happy puff. Martha cut a large slice and put it on a plate for him. He took one bite, and his eyes lit up. "This is the best cake ever, Grandma," he declared, his voice full of a child's pure, unfiltered truth. That simple sentence was Martha's vindication. It was a crown more valuable than any social status. Leo cut a piece for himself, and as he tasted it, the years fell away. He was a boy again in his mother's kitchen, safe and loved unconditionally. Tears welled in his eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. He looked at his mother, her face glowing with quiet joy, and he knew he had almost lost the most valuable thing in his entire life. The party was over, but the family was just beginning to heal. Amelia, humbled and ashamed, finally stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Martha. She couldn't finish. Martha simply looked at her, not with anger or triumph, but with a quiet, knowing grace, and offered her a piece of cake. It was an offering of forgiveness, a chance to start again. The narrator addresses the audience one last time. What is family, really? Is it the perfect picture you show to the world? Or is it the messy, flower-dusted, unconditional love that happens in the kitchen when no one is watching? True value is rarely loud. It isn't found in expensive gifts or grand houses. It's found in the quiet sacrifices, the handwritten recipes, the steady, unassuming love of those who were there from the very beginning. It is the hidden gem we so often overlook in our search for glittering glass. Don't let the world blind you to the treasures you already have. Remind someone today that they are the heart of your family. Share this story if you believe that love, not pride, is what truly makes a home.